The Dominican Republic announced it recognized there is only one China and that Taiwan is Chinese territory.
It's another victory for Beijing. El Salvador has become the third country this year to break off diplomatic ties with Taiwan.
The government of the Republic of Nicaragua declares that it recognizes that there is only one China in the world. The People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government representing all of China and Taiwan.
Honduras has formally broken off decades-long diplomatic relations with Taiwan and switched to China.
Gracias, Presidente Xi Jinping. Valoro esta histórica apertura de relaciones con la República Popular China y con su pueblo. Como presidenta de Honduras, reconozco una sola China.
La visión de la presidenta constitucional de la República de Honduras, Xiomara Castro, en desarrollar la economía alrededor de los puertos de Cortés, Castilla y San Lorenzo, con el objetivo de agilizar el transporte de las mercancías, implementar la estrategia del nearshoring con los socios comerciales estratégicos y generar las condiciones para aumentar el flujo comercial con el ferrocarril interoceánico, convertirá a Honduras en el hub logístico de carga terrestre para Centroamérica.
Immediately recognized the logo, which was Costco Shipping. As Costco Shipping is a Chinese state-owned enterprise, state-owned company that works very closely with the PLA. In fact, they are one of the logistical service providers for the PLA's quote-unquote invasion drills, the drills that they've done essentially in the South China Sea and in other parts of the coastal waters near China. And as you can tell by the name, invasion drill means a drill to invade an occupied territory. So it just shows you kind of like, to me, it's symbolic of how China's enters the certain countries in Latin America, which begins in a very stealthy presence. And then over time, it starts to open up that presence. This whole transoceanic railway that the Honduran government is building, they're not going to say that that's China, even though it's already been reported that China's given them money to help build out some of the ports that are involved with this transoceanic railway. But they're advertising it as their initiative. But when you dig to the details, it's a Belt and Road initiative that's part of China's geostrategic ambitions, geopolitical ambitions around the world. So that's one small example, I think, of how China's coming into Central America in a very stealthy manner. Almost everywhere else that China has presence in Latin America, they boast about their presence. They put their flag up, they have their embassy, they hold receptions. In Honduras, they're hidden. Even though they have official relations, they won't deny that.
So they have an embassy, but it's not on the street with a flag.
It's in the 5th floor of a hotel in Tegucigalpa, the capital. I think the reason is because they're trying to work with and through the Honduran government to not make the Honduran government look like a proxy of China, in fact, which they are.
Welcome to Roatán, local time 2:28. Use caution when opening your remittances.
Welcome to Roatán. This is an island, a beautiful island, about 40 miles off the northern coast of Honduras. It's a beautiful island filled with sandy beaches, tourists all year round, but that's not why we're here. We're not here for tourism. We're here in Roatán because there's a very special project, kind of a one-of-a-kind, very unique effort happening here in Roatán that is essentially becoming the beacon of economic freedom in the Western Hemisphere. The effort is called ZERES, which is a Spanish acronym. It stands for Zonas de Empleo y Desarrollo Económico, which is basically special economic zones. These are zones that are autonomous in many respects. They're subnational. They have the ability to create a special zone that provides human rights at the Bill of Rights level in the United States, property rights probably better than anywhere in the world, and economic incentives so that entrepreneurs can thrive. And they are thriving. In fact, if you go here, there's a conference going on right now. I think it's called Vitalia, where you're having hundreds of entrepreneurs are coming in to get a sense of what's happening inside this area, which is called Prospera. Prospera is one of three ZERES in Honduras, but it's the one that's been the most targeted by a robust and very brutal disinformation campaign by the Honduran government.
Prospera es un enemigo del pueblo hondureño, especialmente enemigo de aquí, este pueblo de Roatán, y debemos de verlo como enemigo.
And that's why we're here. Not just because of the disinformation campaign, but we do want to separate fact from fiction to see what's reality when it comes to Prospera, the special economic zones. But more importantly, we want to see why. Why has the Honduran government decided to essentially focus almost solely on one U.S. investment, which is Prospera, and decided to essentially delegitimize it, to defame it, to distort the perception about it inside the local community and inside Central America and Honduras writ large. And what we're coming to find out is in March of 2023, President Xiomara Castro, who's a self-avowed socialist president, socialist government of Honduras, Xiomara Castro broke with decades of diplomatic tradition by breaking relations with Taiwan. In March of 2023, she officially recognized the People's Republic of China and started a new relationship with the Communist China and the socialist government of Honduras, which was frankly to be expected. But what's interesting is in the time since, subsequently Xiomara Castro traveled to Beijing to meet with her counterpart Xi Jinping, was the series of agreements that they're beginning to sign. They eventually want to sign a free trade agreement between China and Honduras. And if it was really about free trade, I don't think anybody would worry about it. But we're talking about a communist-controlled country in China, a socialist-controlled country in Honduras, and we're talking about the use of the word free trade in a way to use economic warfare as a way to advance China's geopolitical and strategic interests. That's why we're here in Roatán, because of the 17 or so agreements that have been signed between Honduras and China in less than a year since Xiomara Castro came back from Beijing last year in 2023, there's one in particular that I'm interested in, and that's the adoption of Honduras into the Belt and Road Initiative. Because as we've looked at in other parts of the world, in Africa or in other countries in Latin America, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is basically a pseudonym for China's PLA, the People's Liberation Army. It's an economic effort that has military and geopolitical ambitions. So that's why we're here, because we're outside of visiting Prospera, which you guys will get to see in a minute. You get to see exactly what it's like, separate all the fact from fiction. We'll actually also visit the local community, Crawfish Rock, which is the community in which Prospera is located to adjacent. But we actually then wanted to go to mainland Honduras. And we want to look at some of these infrastructure projects that China is starting to build, particularly when it comes to ports. There's some port infrastructure projects that are in the works. And we're going to go to the Port of San Lorenzo in the Pacific coast of Honduras. So we're going to take you from one of the most northern points of Honduras, which is right here on Roatán Island, to one of the most southern parts of Honduras, which is the Port of San Lorenzo, to get a sense of why is China so adamant about helping the Honduran government dislodge U.S. investments so potentially it could start to take over, because we believe that agreement and a potential trade agreement between China and Honduras could be the gateway for China into Central America. We're on our way to Prospera. So if you guys didn't see on the Border Wars podcast, we had a really good episode with the General Counsel of Prospera, Nick Dranias, who basically gave us the A to Z, kind of the inside look at how Prospera was created, and also talked a lot about the challenges that they're facing, both currently and previously, and even to look into maybe some future challenges. And that's kind of why we're here, and we're going to start to look at it. But honestly, that conversation with Nick really motivated me to really want to check out Prospera myself. I mean, it's nothing like visiting these things on your own. And the idea here is to get a sense of what Prospera is actually delivering here on Roatán and in Honduras in general. People here in Honduras, some of the intellectual entrepreneurs, are not only very smart, but they're very innovative and they're risk takers. And I said this in the podcast. So here you go. The cars are they're like not the best roads, let's say. They're naturally outside the box thinkers, mostly because they have to be. They live in Honduras, so they have to basically deal with all the red tape, the corruption, basically all the lack of rule of law inside this country. And that's a motivator. That's something that makes you want to change things, because you know that that's not how it's supposed to be. You know that your country has the potential to do a lot more. So you get motivated. So a lot of these really smart, risk-taking intellectual entrepreneurs in Honduras really began this project. So that's the sign of Prospera right there. You can see their logo on the fence. So you can see where like the development, you can tell this is not a paved road. We're moving up here. You can tell where the development begins as soon as you start to hit that paved road and you start to see the pavement come in. And this is now the more developed area where they're building out this project. This is the road to freedom inside Roatán.
On the top of the highest in Roatán. And that's exactly because we have a zoning regulation different than the rest of the island. That's what makes it possible for us to have
They can't build it that high.
They can go up to 8 floors, and currently the biggest one is 5. And Pristine Bay is over there. Like if you see the floating things over there and the dock, that's Pristine Bay over there. So it's just across the hill.
Prospera has given the families in my community, Crawfish Rock, a brighter future. It has given them the opportunity that parents can have their kids continue education. It has given them just simply like a self of respect for themselves as mothers, that they are now receiving a salary, that they can pay for medical, they can buy their kids' uniform, they can buy drinking water. You know, there are moms in that community that had never had a job until Prospera came. You know, and that's something that you don't find in every company. No. You know, they care about people here. There's someone here. If you need to talk to someone, you can always reach someone. I mean, I don't understand why people are not knowing the truth about Prospera.
Why do you think they're painting a picture of Prospera that, based on my time here, doesn't seem to be true at all? But why do you think they're doing that?
I think Prospera for the Honduran people is the best option. To be honest, I feel better working right here.
Yeah.
I feel better, and because you have the opportunity to have more options to do right here, right now. And I think that was a reason that I would start my student for laws and all that.
You started working here?
Y gracias al trabajo que tuve en Prospera y la oportunidad que tengo acá, tengo tiempo para estudiar. Tuve la oportunidad de traerme a mi mamá a vivir conmigo.
La oportunidad está acá.
La oportunidad está acá.
En el combate frontal al modelo neoliberal que promueve la corrupción y el despojo como sangre que lo alimenta. Debemos tentar las bases del proyecto del socialismo democrático.
We repealed the ZE law, the law on employment and economic development zone.
No, that's serious. That caught my attention because it kind of shows an autocratic tendency of essentially wanting to now impose your will over not just the political class but investments, and that's the thing that worries us in the U.S. because those kind of maneuvers scare investors. I mean, the investors will just run away because they're like, I'm gonna go to jail if I even put money down. And I think, to me, in my mind, at least, that starts to sound like that may be part of the goal. The part of the goal is to scare U.S. But it's funny, scare U.S. investors because if it's Russian or Chinese investors,
it's U.S. investors, and the President Zelaya has been quoted on that. Like a political family member has told me personally that President Zelaya expressly said, I don't want more U.S. investment because more U.S. investment means more U.S. influence, and so he doesn't want it. And I also spoke with one of the ministers of the government recently, and a lot of the free zone authorizations for traditional free zones are for Chinese companies and and from other nationalities, but not particularly U.S. There might be a few, I don't know, but he was focused on how many Chinese companies he had gotten.
Xiomara Castro is a proud supporter of the Nicolás Maduro regime in Venezuela and of the Castro dictatorship in Cuba. Her administration recently held a rally, an event, a significant event against Zedes, an anti-Zede event, gave front row seating to the ambassadors of Cuba, Venezuela, and of China. Iranian TV, Hispan TV, has been leading misinformation campaigns against Zedes, and employees of Hispan TV make up the president's press corps. In this event that took place recently, it was led by people that have never been on site, have not done any proper due diligence, and naturally were blatantly lying compared to facts on the ground in what was a very obvious misinformation campaign led by these international experts that they brought on, supported by these three ambassadors.
If we go back 20 years ago, China had a negligible presence in Latin America. They weren't the top trade partner of any country in the region. Today, they are the top trade partner of 9 out of the 12 sovereign nations in South America. Most of South America pretty much prefers to trade with China than the United States. And 14 of the 33 countries in Latin America. They're now focused on Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. So what does that mean? So if it was just trade, if it was just normal trade and investment, I don't think we would worry about that. If it was New Zealand, for instance, we wouldn't be alarmed by it. But China hoodwinks these countries by saying that they want trade and investment, and they do some of that. But the real intent is military in nature. They have military ambitions. So what China wants to do is they want to diminish the geographic disadvantage with the United States. They want to position naval and military assets in the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere the way that they have in the South China Sea, and they're very close to accomplishing that.
Well, if you want more on this conversation, and it's very deep, you can go to my podcast, From the Kitchen Table with Joseph Humire. We talk about why Latin America is in our neighborhood, and it is our neighborhood, and it affects us directly. By the way, China operating in conjunction with Venezuela. So great episode. Thank you so much for joining us again, Joseph. Always so enlightening.
Están los 3 puntos: Puerto Cortés, Puerto Castilla y el tan anhelado puerto de Amapal.
Okay, we made it. We're here in, this is a very strategic area. This is the Gulf of Fonseca behind me. And this is actually the entry point into Central America from the Pacific Ocean. And I say this is strategic because this is in many ways a maritime tri-border. Over here you have Honduras. We're actually in Honduras. The town here is called Coyolito. We're actually heading to an island called Amapala. We'll be there. It's about a 10-minute ferry ride. So we're actually in Honduras. But behind me, if you could look a little bit further out there in the distance, that's El Salvador. So you could literally have the maritime border between El Salvador and Honduras. And then further out, I think probably that way, further out that way would be Nicaragua. And so this is a maritime tri-border. This is the Gulf of Fonseca. And this is actually where China wants to begin its Belt and Road Initiative, its BRI project in Central America. So we're now on the ferry that's going to Amapala, the island. It's actually called Los Tigres, the island. And as I was explaining before, I mean, this is a very strategic area. It's in essence, a maritime tri-border because we have Honduras. Over here, you have El Salvador. It's further yonder. You see those You can see kind of those mountains on the horizon. That's El Salvador. And you go further out behind this island, you hit Nicaragua. So in essence, you can hit 3 countries from this water area right here. And which is why I think that China specifically is building out the beginning of its Belt and Road Initiative in Central America right here. It's not quite developed yet. Well, we'll see. I don't expect to see a whole lot of development there yet. But of everything we're studying, this is the area. This is where they're focused on. And I was gonna say, actually, our coxswain, our driver, he's actually wearing a China T-shirt, so it's well represented, I guess. So we'll ask him about that later. And it's with the Chinese flag too, so it's very interesting. So basically what they're telling us is that there's a lot of Chinese tourists that come here pretty much every weekend. They come to visit, tour the beach. We don't know that they actually are surveilling the naval base here in Honduras, but honestly, they're probably more looking at territory because if this is going to be a commercial entry point for the BRI, they're probably going to look at positions where they could put these Chinese companies and who owns the territory, the landowners, things like that. So it's a small island, but it does have houses, it does have landowners here. So this is Amapala, as you can see by the sign. There's not a lot here.
La visión de la Presidenta Constitucional de la República de Honduras, Xiomara Castro, en desarrollar la economía alrededor de los puertos de Cortés, Castilla y San Lorenzo, con el objetivo de agilizar el transporte de las mercancías, implementar la estrategia del nearshoring con los socios comerciales estratégicos y generar las condiciones para aumentar el flujo comercial con el ferrocarril interoceánico, convertirá a Honduras en el hub logístico de carga terrestre para Centroamérica.
So this is Port Hennecan. This is into the San Lorenzo port area. This is probably the closest you can get to the Pacific Ocean in terms of commercial shipping. This port is supposedly one of the busiest ports for all the products that come from Asia into Central America. We're in the precipice of the Gulf of Fonseca, where there's several islands. We're going to go visit some of those islands. So if you listen to the conference, the press conference that was given by the Secretary of the President of Honduras, essentially what he talked about was that they would want to begin this interoceanic railway in Amapala. But the reason that they're developing it first in San Lorenzo is because they already secured the financing. Now, the company that's been arranged to essentially develop that port infrastructure, to build it out, is China Harbor Engineering Company.
La compañía china Harbor Engineering Company, que se anunció construirá varias obras en Honduras. Otro de los proyectos es la ampliación del puerto de San Lorenzo, que incluye un muelle de 300 metros.
For those that are unfamiliar with China Harbor Engineering, that's the same company, that's the same state-owned company by China that essentially built out a lot of the ports in the South China Sea. That obviously has been used for military training and military purposes, very close connections to the People's Liberation Army.
Aquí vino la misión china, que iba a hacer un...
¿Y llegaron?
¿Ah?
¿La misión china?
Sí, llegaron. Mire, sí, porque aquí está para expandirlo, hay suficiente material, tierra, para poderlo hacer más grande.
Este puerto está tirando mercadería, ¿va? Entra y sale.
Sí. ¿Y hay empresa china que está trabajando ahí? Sí. So we just visited the port Hunacan, which is the biggest commercial port. You guys saw me down there. And something very interesting happened because as we were leaving the port, we had a conversation with some of the port workers. We couldn't actually get into the port holding and the port authority because the port authority actually told us that they're not allowed to record there, and obviously we don't have an invitation, so we're not part of any official visit. We can get an official visit, but we'd have to do some paperwork and it would take a little bit of time, so we'll maybe do that another opportunity. But the most interesting thing was as we were leaving the road that takes us into the actual port, we came across a cargo delivery truck, an 18-wheeler. And then I immediately recognized the logo, which was Costco Shipping. You guys all know who Costco Shipping is. Costco Shipping is a Chinese state-owned enterprise, state-owned company that works very closely with the PLA. In fact, they are one of the logistical service providers for the PLA's quote-unquote invasion drills, the drills that they've done essentially in the South China Sea and in other parts of the coastal waters near China. And as you can tell by the name, invasion drill means a drill to invade an occupied territory, which we can all take a healthy guess at which territory that would be, which would be obviously Taiwan. And so we saw the Costco Shipping container, and it was interesting because it came right after a time that we had a conversation with one of the construction workers at the port who was telling us that the Chinese have arrived. Then he kind of retracted it a bit, but also said that there's supposedly be a big Chinese company that's supposed to come to help with the construction, but they haven't arrived. And he seemed to kind of be a bit nervous. You guys can see part of it. We're leaving Honduras now. We had a very productive trip, as you guys can tell, but I want to share with you a little bit of what I'm thinking so far. And it begins with this question of sovereignty, because this is essentially the crux of the issue here in Honduras, and I'd say within Latin America, probably the world. But the big argument that the government of Honduras, the socialist government of President Xiomara Castro and the LIBRE party, the big argument that they make about attacking the Zeres, about is trying to displace Prospera, U.S. investment, U.S. company, is about sovereignty issues. They're saying that they're violating the sovereignty of Roatán, they're violating the sovereignty of Honduras. But that's very curious to me because in our experience here, in our research, it's very clear to me that the one that's violating the sovereignty is the government itself. And they're violating the sovereignty by basically giving strategic infrastructure that belongs to Honduras to international actors that don't have Honduras in mind in terms of their well-being. And I'm obviously referring to China. There's no secret that China has done this throughout the world. They've done this throughout Africa. They've done this throughout South Asia. They're doing it in other parts of Latin America. But in essence, they're essentially hoodwinking the Hondurans to believe that this is about their well-being, this is about their prosperity, this is about their security, when in reality, this is about geopolitics, and this is about the new Honduran government, relatively new, Xiomara Castro, aligning Honduras away from the United States and towards the geopolitical orbit of China, as well as its international allies, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba. In fact, while we were here, reports started to be released about, I think it's 97 Cuban doctors that have that have arrived on the country from these medical brigades, these infamous medical brigades of Cuba. For any of you guys that have followed the news of the Cuban medical brigades, those are intelligence missions. And it's no surprise that as they get kicked out of Brazil, previously were kicked out of Brazil when President Bolsonaro was in office, about 40 miles north of the coast of Honduras, it's in a strategic waterway because it's right at the heart. In fact, there's another island that's even further north of Honduras in the territorial waters of the country, which is called Swan Island. And supposedly, Swan Island is where the new government of Xiomara Castro is going to be building a mega prison. But again, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's so much territory in the landmass of Honduras that's not used that they could build a prison anywhere in the country that would be cheaper, more logistically efficient to be able to transport prisoners, and just makes a lot more sense. It doesn't make any sense to put a prison in an island way far away from the territory, and the only thing that you really can think about is the potential dual use of that island. One of the things that you'll see in our study that's going to come out, and we'll elaborate further in the study, I'm going to say not that much right now, and this kind of gets at the heart of the sovereignty issue, is as much as the government claims that they're attacking Prospera because that they feel that they're violating the sovereignty, and you heard what the propaganda was being spread through Crawfish Rock in the community, the reality is the government's already putting Roatán into the sovereign control of outside actors. But this to me shows you that all these arguments about sovereignty, all these arguments about trying to build paths to prosperity, these are just propaganda talking points by the government of Honduras. I'm convinced after visiting here and spending some time and just the additional research that my team is doing about Central America, that the government of Xiomara Castro and the LIBRE Party of Honduras is actually doing the bidding of China. They're giving the critical infrastructure to China, much the way during the Cold War, other Central American countries gave the territory to the Soviet Union. The Cubans are going to come and the Venezuelans are going to come to do some of the groundwork. But essentially, it's going to be China that's going to build out this infrastructure because they need it to be able to pre-position their military assets in Central America. So that's the general conclusion of what we're seeing right now. And I think a proper way to counter this for the United States is to re-engage the region, and to re-engage the region to protect U.S. investments, to help bolster and establish property rights. And that's why Prospera is such an interesting development, because beyond the investments, beyond all the opportunities that it's bringing both to Hondurans and to international investors, it's essentially providing a rule of law framework with some of the strongest property rights in the world, which is exactly what this country needs. This country is beautiful. It has an abundance of resources, has abundance of labor, has abundance of hardworking, as a culture that's very hardworking. It just has had very bad governments, and none worse than the one it has right now, that I believe is undermining the sovereignty of the country in the name of the People's Republic of China.